All right. Hello, this is Nate. You can also call me Nathan, but please never call me Nathaniel. And welcome to reviewing every Monster Train card featuring the Stygian Guard. This is the third of the series. There will be 3 more after this, 2 covering Umbra and Melting Remnant, and then 1 covering the neutral cards. So really appreciate, again, all the support for the series so far. I appreciate the comments. Please, after you're done, feel free, jump into the comments. And I'm happy to discuss further if you have disagreements about some of the card ratings and how I viewed the cards or comments. I'm happy to continue the discussion in the comments or also on my Discord channel. And if you like this video and have not subscribed yet to the channel, would really appreciate it. Subscriptions go a long way toward helping to qualify as a Twitch partner, or not Twitch partner, as a YouTube partner. So any subscription helps to get me closer and closer to getting to partnership level. So really appreciate if you have not yet doing that, and if you have, thank you again for subscribing, and I hope you're enjoying the content. All right, let's jump into the setup. The same as the others so far. We cover every card in each clan. All champions and artifacts will be covered as part of separate videos, so we'll have like a champions video and an artifacts video after we're done with this series. We always review in terms of, or in the context of standard play, so we don't talk about multiplayer or mutators, daily challenges, anything like that. And the cards are not reviewed in a vacuum, but rather how well do they fit in the common build archetypes. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the next slide, rating scale. So again, to clarify, my ratings are based on what is the potential power level and consistency of a card. So S cards means that you can basically add this card into any deck and it's going to be powerful, meaning that it will be one of the main factors which is carrying the deck. There are only 2 cards in the deck which I believe are currently at an S power level. We already talked about one of them in the last episode with Awoken, the Unleash the Wildwood. There's one other one that will be coming up in one of the next videos. A cards are cards that are consistently strong, so their worst case is a strong card, and have the potential to also carry the deck. They are also very rare, certainly rarer than B and C grade cards. So the idea is that you could take this card and add it to any build, and it's going to be a strong card. And in some builds, it's even going to be an incredibly powerful card. B-level cards are cards that are generally strong, but don't have that like carry potential of a really powerful card. Alternatively, it's a powerful card that at worst case is average. So you're still happy to play it. It's an average card. It's better than a deadweight. But then has the potential to scale up and be incredibly powerful. So it's either a generally strong, consistently strong across all builds card, or it is a card that has variance, but the low variance is average, whereas the high variance would then, be an incredibly powerful card. C cards are cards that are generally average, so you can put them into any build, but they're not going to be particularly strong. You're going to get kind of an average benefit from them. Alternatively, they are cards which are situationally powerful or strong, but their worst case is that they're incredibly weak, basically equal to a deadweight in terms of value. And this is where I think a lot of people so far in the first 2 videos have had a lot of issue is C cards, because oftentimes I will put, and I do again with Stygian Guard, put cards in C that are very powerful. And that's true. There are going to be very powerful cards that are considered C grade. And what's making them C grade is that when they don't fit that powerful situation, they are a deadweight. They're actually a negative in your deck. And the fact that they have such huge variance for me is why I'm putting them in C grade. It doesn't mean that they're not powerful. It means that they are not consistent. Alternatively, we just have cards that are generally average and are never going to be carries. They're never going to be strong cards. They're just going to be generally average. And then finally, we have D cards that are generally weak cards. There are not that many D cards. I think there's been, in the first 2 across both, there was, 2 cards that have been D grade? Maybe 3. So they're also very rare. But there are a handful of cards that I think need a buff because right now they are just generally weak. They have no powerful synergy, and even playing it at its best case is still maybe barely average, but more generally it's going to be a weak card. So with that in mind, let's jump into the builds, common Stygian Guard builds. So we have with Tethys, Titansbane, Frostbitten. So the Frostbitten build is very straightforward. You get Chillwind with a big tank and extra Frostbite sources. So typically you want a tank that's going to do some type of AoE, because Chillwind does not do AoE. He does a big, she does a big burst damage onto the front unit, both in terms of damage and in terms of Frostbite. It's fantastic for killing bosses. So Chillwind is, I think, the best boss killer in the game, as long as there's a decent tank in front and there's no sweep or spikes. It can also work with Cold Channel Soul Guard, but Cold Channel Soul Guard is a little bit more complicated because it doesn't guarantee big burst onto tanks, or sorry, big burst onto front units, and it's not quite as good in relentless combat, I believe, than Chillwind. Mostly because Chillwind doesn't tank. You want a different tank in front. I would say best paired with like a Titan Sentry, or an anything with spikes is good, or anything with sweep is good. Then you have the ultimate incant floor. It's very straightforward. You get Conduit Tethys with incant units. You want to get an Offering Monument, and then you just draw and draw and draw and draw. And the fact that Conduit makes all your damage spells free makes it so that you can incant very easily and get massive incant triggers on that floor with incant units. Big Bang. This is with spell weakness. I can't remember what it's called, the Tethys variant, but you get spell weakness, and then you just have big damage spells. So yeah, you get like Ancient Synergy, you get Ice Storm, Ice Tornadoes, yeah, any cards that are going to do big amounts of damage, especially ones that do multiple ticks of damage, and then you just dump spell weakness on bosses and you blow them away with the spell weakness plus big spells. Also works very well. And especially because Tethys will attack multiple times during Relentless, you can get a lot of stacks of spell weakness during the Relentless combat. Next we have Soulguard the Martyr. There's the Soulguard the Mighty builds. This is with Titan Channel and Incants. The biggest thing you need with Soulguard the Mighty is you need to be able to play on average 6 spells. That way you can get Soulguard out in 3 turns, or I guess 5 spells, so you can get Soulguard out in 3 turns. It becomes problematic when you can't get Soulguard out that quickly. So you need a lot of low cost or a lot of draw. And if you think like with 4, I guess you could do it in 4 turns, but the problem is that you're going to have units leaking. So typically Soulguard the Mighty is great during Relentless combat because of the high health. You put any damage dealer behind, and you're taking advantage of all that high health on Soulguard. It's the highest health base unit in the game. But your problem is going to be AoE, and it's going to be getting Soulguard activated before you have units getting to your pyre. So you almost always want to play Soulguard on the top floor, and then you just try to get as many incants, and then you try to get some form of AoE, either sweep or you're getting multi-strike on Soulguard. Trample can also work, spikes, anything that's going to kill off backliners. And then you have the ultimate incant floor 2. It's basically the same as with Tethys. The difference is you use Dire Channel, and you don't get the Conduit cost reduction, but you make up for it because Dire Channel does an insane amount of damage. So it's doing a lot more damage than Conduit does. It just means you don't incant quite as much. But this is probably my go-to build with Soulguard, is the ultimate incant floor style, where you take Dire Channel and then just put incant units and go crazy with incanting. Okay. Outside of the champion-oriented builds, we then have a Frostbitten Plus. So it's you take any type of Frostbite-oriented deck and you add Hoarfrost Effigy. The basic benefit of Hoarfrost Effigy is that it can kill flying bosses very, very quickly. It's not as good on standard bosses because you can't pre-stack. You can only stack on the bottom floor at best, or maybe middle or top floor, depending on how you're playing the build. And then you can only Hoarfrost Effigy like a maximum of 2 or 3 times. So you don't get as much value out of it as you do on the flying bosses, but it certainly makes flying boss kills much more feasible. And it also, which you might think, okay, that's only for high score, but actually there are some cases where the Seraphs do so much damage to your units that you use Hoarfrost Effigy to kill Seraph before the units kill your Pyre. This is very common for me when you're doing Frostbitten builds. A lot of the Seraph Drain-rated units have really high health totals, and they do a lot of damage to your Pyre. So then being able to kill Seraph before the Relentless combat, it can save you 2 or 3 rounds of getting units leaking through and killing your Pyre. So it's not just for score, it's also for safety and actually winning the runs. There's the OSAP build. This used to be the premier build with Stygian Guard before Lodestone Totem was nerfed into the ground. But basically it's a Lodestone Totem with 5+ spells per turn. You stack insane amounts of sap, and even if you're not killing the units, you're totally fine because they end up just dying to the Pyre, and then you get insane amounts of sap onto the bosses, and they don't do damage to you, and you kill them by virtue of them not doing any damage to you. So it still can work. It's much more difficult to pull off now. You can supplement it with Drains and Guardian's Amulets. But as I said, it's much more difficult because Lodestone Totem's now so expensive, but it still can work, and it's still a very strong build once Lodestone Totem gets out there and you can start incanting. Outside of like specific Stygian Guard builds, you then have kind of general support. You have really strong tanks and really strong incant units, which fit into almost every other class or clan. I say classes, should be clans, but it fits really well into any other clans. Frostbite, Sap, and Spell Weakness, you bring them into other clans as well, and it's pretty good. And then there's a lot of spell damage in this particular clan. So if you need spell damage to burst out units, this is the clan that's going to give it to you. Okay, so that's enough about builds. Let's jump into the cards, starting with Stygian Guard units. We'll start with the common units. There's only one, Mollusk Mage. So Mollusk Mage has text, adds 7 magic power on this floor. It is a 1 cost, 7 damage, 1 health unit. Mollusk Mage can be very strong. You're typically not going to see it become very powerful outside of the very specific bug that used to be in the game. But ignoring that bug, Mollusk Mage isn't going to be carrying your deck. Even getting multiple of them isn't necessarily that powerful. It's certainly better now because there's a lot of attuned cards. And those attuned cards are going to add 35 damage from Mollusk Mage, which is certainly better. Basically, Mollusk Mage is the main purpose of Mollusk Mage is to help clear out backliners much easier. It makes a lot of your X-cost cards much better because then they can play for free. And it makes a lot of your AoE much more consistent. And that makes it very strong. The problem is if you don't have a lot of good magic damage or attuned cards to start with, it ends up being pretty bad. It's a 1 cost 7/1 that doesn't really add anything other than the spell damage. So for me, it's a very inconsistent unit. And it's especially inconsistent when you start with it. If you, for example, go Soul Guard and then you don't have like Hellhorned primary, then you're not going to have very much spell damage to upgrade, and that becomes again kind of problematic. So because it's very inconsistent, I put it as a C grade. It certainly can be very strong. It's never going to be so powerful it's carrying your deck, but it is going to be very strong. And given that it has chances to be strong, I definitely put it as C grade. And the problem is that it's at worst case is not average. It's actually pretty weak. A 7/1 for 1 is a very weak card. It's almost like it's as good as like an imp, or even worse than a lot of the imps. So okay, so then moving on, uncommon. Starting with Cold Celia. So Cold Celia was one of my favorite units to start with, and it's certainly not bad. It's at worst average. A 1 cost 115 that sweeps and adds Frostbite 3, so you could actually say it's not even a 115, it's like a 415, or if you consider all of the Frostbite damage, it can be a 3, 2, 1, so 6, so it could be a 715 sweep. It's one of the best, base damage sweep units in the game, if you consider the Frostbite that it's putting onto enemies. The fact that it can increase the stacks of Frostbite as well, make it a lot better. But it can also be a carry card. If you get a large stone and then multi-strike, it's putting out a lot of damage. AoE across all units. You get trample on it. It's even better because the frostbite ticks each time there's carryover. It adds extra frostbite. So it has the potential to be a very strong carry unit. And base, it's still at worst average. Given that setup, and I also don't think it's a base strong unit. It's a base average unit because the health total is so low and the damage is really actually not that high compared to a lot of other units. I can't give it an A grade, but it's definitely a B grade and borderline B plus because even without any upgrades, without any buffs, it's still pretty good. Cuddle Hex. So Cuddle Hex has text, end of turn, apply Frozen to a random card in your hand. It's a 1 cost 5/2. Very similar to Mollusk Mage in that if you don't care about its effect, it's a 1 cost 5/2, which is very, very bad. That's a D grade card. I would say the text more often than not is very helpful. Where Cuddle Hex becomes problematic is when you have heavy discard builds, because then you're discarding the cards that get frozen, and it's not particularly great then. I'm thinking of decks that are using things like, what is it, the Swarm? Frenzied Swarm. So Frenzied Swarm is going to remove all the cards in your deck, and then, you don't have anything to get frozen. And as well, it can oftentimes freeze cards that you don't want to keep in your deck. But I would say it's generally a positive benefit and can be a very strong benefit. It's never going to be a carry card. I don't think freezing a random card is ever going to be good enough to carry you through a run, but it can be very strong. And given that it has that strong situation, and although it can be very inconsistent, I think it fits really well in the C. So it's weak without taking benefit from the text. It can be strong when you take benefit from the text, and I would say it's about, I don't know if it's 50-50, it's probably 60-40. You take more benefit than you don't, but it still has that inconsistency where you don't want it into every deck. You want to make sure it's a deck where you're going to take advantage of freezing a random card. It's also god-awful in volatile gauge builds. So if you have volatile gauge, avoid Cuddle Hex because it's really bad. Next up is Guard of the Unnamed. So Guard of the Unnamed has text, incant, gain armor 3. Used to be worse until they buffed it. I think given the buff now, it's a very strong card. It's a 5/15 with good upside. If you're playing 2 spells per turn, it's out armoring a Steelworker. And Steelworker I gave a B. I think it was a strong unit. I think Guard of the Unnamed is similarly strong. I don't believe Guard of the Unnamed has full carry potential. Because it's not increasing health, it's increasing armor. And so the only thing you can really do to take advantage of it is Battering Ram. So it's a very, very, very narrow scope where you can take advantage of the armor gain to actually carry you. Certainly when it gets insanely stacked up, then it can make builds that would otherwise fail succeed because you have this massive tank with huge amounts of armor. But even then, I would say it's very, very rare that it's actually the main reason why your deck is winning. It's just one of several strong tanks that could enable your deck to succeed. Given that, I think it fits really well as a B. It's probably like a B+. If it had slightly more damage, like if it was a 15/15, I would give it an A for certain. Or if it had gain armor 4, even 1 more armor would easily be an A. But I think right now it sits right like on that edge where it's a B+. Maybe you could just arguably say it's an A-. Certainly a very good card, and it can fit in a lot of builds, which is why I like it a lot. Next we have Guardian Stone. So Guardian Stone is text, incant, apply armor 1 to friendly units. Certainly it increases in value the more units that you have, but let's say the standard case. Okay, so let's take both situations where you're going to have a Guardian Stone. Typically you're going to have 2 units, right? So you're going to have your champion and maybe a tank, or if your champion is the tank, you'll have your champion and then a secondary unit. You play 2 spells, and that's added 6 armor to the entire floor. 2 to itself, 2 to the front unit, 2 to the back unit. And I would say generally you're not playing 2 spells per turn, you're on average playing 3 spells per turn if you're playing Stygian Guard, because there's so many low cost spells, and there's so many opportunities to get more draw and get free spells. Very likely you're playing something like 3 or 4 per turn. At 3 or 4 per turn, we're talking about like 9 armor or 12 armor per turn added to the entire floor. Really, really strong. What's especially good about Guardian Stone is it's a very good totem to protect your backline, because oftentimes you'll get those sweep units. With Guardian Stone, you play 3 or 4 spells and now your backline's not dying to sweep. I think it's a very, very strong card. It has the potential to carry your deck. If you get if you have Hellhorned as your secondary and you get every armor adds +4, this is just absolutely nuts, and it will carry any deck because you're going to get so much armor out of it. So I think it's at worst it's average. The worst situation is that it dies before it has a chance to incant a few times, which does happen, and then that's a kind of bad scenario because of its low health total. But you get like a single health stone on it, and then it's going to live through most things. And I think it has the potential to carry. I would say it's not quite an A because there are enough situations where it's not really strong. It's more like an average unit, but it's borderline. It's very similar to Guard of the Unnamed. I give it a B, B+, potentially A-. I think if it was a 0.5, I would give it an instant A. But the 1 health becomes problematic because there are so many sweep units that do 4 or more damage that you have to incant at least 3 times, and that can be difficult to play incant enough to where it's surviving and then staying through the rest of the fight. But outside of those circumstances, I think it's really, really good, and it has the potential to carry. So B+, but arguably A- card. Next up is Icy Silophyte. Icy Silophyte has text sweep, and on strike apply spell weakness 1 to the attacked unit. So this applies +1 spell weakness to the entire floor. Unlike Icy Cold Celia, Icy Silophyte is not guaranteed to do that much damage with its text, and this makes it very inconsistent. I think it has a higher top-end damage potential because spell weakness stacks can become insane, especially if you have something like Icy Silophyte with multi-strike, and then you put a Hellstone on it, or something, whatever's going to make it survive better, maybe even a large stone. The extra spell weakness has a higher damage potential than the 3 Frostbite does. The problem is that you have to then have spell damage which justifies the spell weakness, and you just don't always have that much spell damage. Either you don't get them or it just doesn't fit your build. So you can't just slot an Icy Silophyte into any build and have it be strong. If you slot it into the wrong build, it's very, very weak. And given that it has that very, very high variance where it's either really good or pretty bad, I can't put it as a B grade, but I think it's a C+. I think it's very easy to take advantage of it. You just have one really good spell, even with Permafrost or Holdover, you could take advantage of the spell weakness, or just getting it extra damage, then it's a solid sweep unit. But given its like variance there, I can't put it higher than a C, but I do think it's like right on the edge. I think it's a C+, almost a B- in terms of power and consistency. What I think it would need is if it had 5 damage, or if it had maybe 15 health, I would easily put it as a B. 15 health, I think, just barely puts it over. 5 damage would easily put it over. But given how it is, I still think it's a very strong card. You should take it if you have any high damage spells in your deck. But if you don't, then you want to avoid it. It's not going to add any value to your deck. Next is Nameless Siren, the first of the, well, not the first of the Sirens, but first of the major incant units. So Nameless Siren has text, incant, gain rage of 2. Base stats, 5 and 5 damage, 10 health for 1 Ember. It's very, very good. Nameless Siren is one of the main carries of the Stygian Guard. the damage scales faster than most other units in the game. You play, let's say, 3 spells, and suddenly it has an extra, 12 damage on top, and then that just continues to stack and stack and stack and stack. Where Nameless Siren becomes problematic is in 2 different cases. One, it's very bad against Seraph the Chaste because it's going to lose half of its rage every turn, and it's hard to keep up with the amount of rage you're losing from Seraph the Chaste. Doesn't mean you can't play it against Seraph the Chaste, it just becomes very problematic. The other is it doesn't have a very good way of scaling its health. And the health is really low, like 10 health is not very good. So you can't just take a Nameless Siren and add it into a deck and it's going to automatically be strong. It does have that very weak situation, but I think it's quite easy to get around. And the fact that it can solo carry your deck if you get enough incants on it and you have at least some kind of decent tank in front, or alternatively you have quick multi-strike, and then even a moderate tank will then be enough for Nameless Siren to survive until Relentless and then just wipe out the bosses in 2 or 3 hits. So I think it has the potential to be very, very strong. It does have a very inconsistent worst case scenario. But I would say that worst case scenario is rare enough that I give it a B grade. And this is really a B+. This is again one that's right on the edge. I think if it had slightly higher base health, it would easily be an A. Maybe like 15-20 base health would make a huge difference with how consistent the card is in decks where you aren't necessarily having it be your carry. Next, we have Siren of the Sea. Siren of the Sea has text +2 damage, +2 health on incant, and it has base health 5 base stats of 5 damage, 10 health for 1. I think Siren of the Sea is not. It doesn't have the highest highs like you get with the Nameless Siren, but it's much more consistent. If you play 3 spells, it's already an 11-16 unit, or 11-16 unit, which is a good unit. That's a solid unit. You play like, I think across a standard run, let's say 15 spells, that's adding 30 damage, 30 health to a unit. That's a strong unit, even if you don't have any of the other enablers for your incant builds. So it's much more consistent than Nameless Siren, but it's not going to scale as hard as Nameless Siren in the cases where you can scale Nameless Siren. And I should also mention Nameless Siren is fantastic with any rage synergies, where Siren of the Sea does not include any of those synergies. So putting something like a Deranged Brute in a Siren of the Sea build, you don't get a lot of value out of it because there's not rage there. Similar if you get rage tokens or any other rage artifacts or any other rage-oriented stuff, it's not as good on Siren of the Sea as it is on the Nameless Siren. But I think in decks where you don't have rage as a main staple, Siren of the Sea is much more consistent. And because of that consistency, I think it bumps it up to an A grade, where at worst it is strong, but it has the potential to be a very strong carry. And I think it's one of the most consistent cards in the game. Titan Sentry. Titan Sentry has text on revenge, so when you take damage, apply Frostbite 3 to enemy units. And I mentioned this during the Awoken. I think I might have even mentioned it during the Hellhorned review as well. I believe that tanks that do AoE are some of the strongest units in the game. And Titan Sentry is a very, very strong unit. It has 35 health, which is a lot more base health than a lot of other units, and it applies that Frostbite for every time it takes damage. So when you have multi-strike, when you have relentless combats, when you have a lot of units doing a lot of low health or low damage, Titan Sentry is amazing. You can slot it into any build. So what you'll find, and I even do this a lot, is you have like an incant deck, and then you just toss a Titan Sentry on the bottom floor to kill off some of the earlier floors, and then it dies. But during that time, you've been able to scale up your top floor, and Titan Sentry has made it so that that top floor survives. And that's such a strong, powerful effect. It's like a spell that is basically kill the first 2 waves. It's not entirely that, because it doesn't do quite that much damage, but oftentimes it can end up being played that way, especially during Seraph fights. Even base, 1 health or 1 Titan Sentry with 35 damage, it will clear almost every single first wave of Seraph. And so if you think about that, just play a card, clears the waves. I would take a spell that is clear a wave and consume. That is a strong card. Titan Sentry at worst is a clear a floor and consume. But it has so much upside on top of that. You get Endless on it, you get incant gain armor, you get healing, you get frostbite increases, so you get the the Cuddlebeard, so then you're doing 5 frostbite and it doesn't decay. Like, there's so many ways to scale Titan Sentry into the nuts level. But as I said, the worst case scenario is clear 1 or 2 floors and then consume. And for me, that is enough to put it as an easy A, borderline S. Titan Sentry is the only unit in the game I believe is strong enough to justify an almost S grade. This is an A+ unit that fits into any build. I almost always take it when it appears. It's just super strong. I don't know that it needs to be nerfed, but it's certainly one of the most consistent units in the game. Next is Glacial Seal. Glacial Seal has text, incant, apply frostbite 2 to enemy units. It's a 2 cost with 1 health and 0 damage. Glacial Seal, prior to the nerf, was a B+, A- unit, because it was 1 cost and then you could instantly start incanting. Adding the second Ember cost actually makes this significantly worse. It's not a D, it's absolutely powerful. So Glacial Seal can, if not carry a deck, can keep a deck alive, or can kill Seraph consistently enough that it's valuable in any incant-oriented deck. So don't say that it's not a bad card, but that 2 Ember cost makes it a lot less consistent. It already had the issue of having such low health that it dies so easily. If you have any type of sweep on the enemy, Glacial Seal just dies if you have no way to buff it. And that is very problematic. That means that in some fights, it's basically just going to die immediately. But in flying boss fights, especially where you can incant a whole lot, it's really, really good. And it can get super nuts if you get Cuddlebeard, you have a lot of incants, and you have a way to put like armor or health onto Glacial Seal, then it becomes very, very good. But again, it's very inconsistent now, and it's even less consistent now that you have the 2 Ember cost. Given that inconsistency, I can't put it higher than a C, but I do believe it's right on the edge. If it went back to 1 cost, it's easily a B card, almost an A- card. That 1 Ember cost makes a huge difference. Alternatively, if it had slightly higher health, but I think all the totems except for the Offering Monument have very low health. So, but if it had like 5 health, it would also be, I would say, a B card, because then it's more likely to survive some of those sweep attacks, which currently it doesn't. It just dies right away. But still a very good card, very, very powerful. You need to have the right setup for it. You need to either have a way to keep it alive, or you need to have a way to cheat out enough Ember that you can take advantage of it the turn that you play it. Let's move on to rare cards. Starting with Offering Monument. So Offering Monument has text, incant, lose 5 max health, and draw 1. Offering Monument is a very surprisingly complex card. There's a lot of hidden things about Offering Monument that are not so apparent the first time you look at it. I think it is one of the most powerful cards in an incant-oriented build. Outside of incant builds, it tends to be very weak. You certainly don't want to tank with it because you might accidentally kill it with losing max health. One thing that's very nice, though, is if you do tank with Offering Monument, if it takes damage and then you incant, you're actually not... It doesn't lower your effective health, it lowers your max health. So let's say it takes 20 damage and then you play 4 spells, you'll actually not even reduce the health. It'll stay at 20 health because you've taken off max health, which is very, very good. So it can work as a temporary tank. And when it's rolling, it rolls hard. I think I remember what I gave this as a grade, and I may even dispute this grade. It might be better than what I gave it, but I think it does have this very, very, very low lows where if you don't have the right build setup, if you don't have a lot of spells, if you don't have incant oriented build, it becomes very bad. It's just like draw cards, and just drawing cards is not necessarily good in all decks. But I think I am going to change this one. Am I going to change this one? I think I am going to change this one. I originally gave it a grade of C. I actually think this should be buffed up. I'm going to change this to a grade of B. So we'll be back in just a second after I've modified the rankings a little bit. Okay, so we've now modified the grade of Offering Monument. I'm going to give it a grade of B. I think it is, even in the worst case, I think it's still just average. Because even in decks where you don't necessarily draw a lot, it's actually not an awful tank. It's a 1 capacity tank that has 40 health, which can be really valuable. And even in the case where you only incant a few times, it does help you get to the cards that you might need later. And I think that's worth keeping it as a B, because at worst it's 1 cost for like several incidental draw, which ends up being really valuable. So I think it fits at a B. I can't put it as an A, but this can certainly be a carry card in an incant oriented build. So I think this fits really nicely. It's a B card where worst case it's average, but it does have some really strong nuts potential in the right decks, especially low cost decks. Some important notes. If you reform Offering Monument, it will add 5 to its maximum health when it died. So it's going to be a typically a 5 health reform or a 6 health. I can't remember if it's 6 health. It might be 6 health reform. If you put Endless on it, it always comes back with 5 health. So don't think that you can Endless or reform Offering Monument to get a ton of value. It will always start off at like 5 to 6 health. So then you're only going to get 1 incant out of it, maybe 2 before it dies again. It's also a way to get infinites. If you get multiple Offering Monuments and you have Reform or Endless on them, they will draw each other. And so you like play the Offering Monument, you play a spell, it dies, then you reform it. The Reform on the second Offering Monument draws another Reform. You can play then the Offering Monument, play that Reform, which draws the other Reform, and then you can get this kind of infinite setup here. Or if you do Endless and you have ways to just Endless them out, also works to get infinites. Next is Lodestone Totem. This is the final unit. Lodestone Totem used to be S tier. You would take it with every single deck you got because it was 1 cost. Now that it is a 3 cost, this significantly nerfs the card. This is your entire turn if you play it in most decks, and not being able to immediately get the impact of the sap dramatically reduces the value of the card. Similar to Glacial Seal, one of the big problems with it is that it dies very easily. Unlike Glacial Seal, it does have some self-protection with the sap, so you can sap things down to low enough damage. It's very bad against Seraph the Patient. It's also very bad against Seraph the Chaste. So in half of the Seraph fights, it doesn't really add a lot of value because you can't out-sap the Patient consistently enough, and Seraph the Chaste will have his own sap regularly. So given that inconsistency, it can't be an A or a B. And even then, I guess, with Seraph the Patient, it probably even nerfed the original Lodestone Totem from an S tier to an A tier. But now that it's 3 cost, it's really inconsistent. It's really hard to play this and then immediately get value out of it, which is what you want. And oftentimes if you're playing Lodestone Totem, you're not playing your other units, which is also problematic because you want to play, you know, your other incanters, and certainly you want to play them over Lodestone Totem. So I often find it's very clunky, very difficult to play properly. When it does work, it's still insane, especially if you're playing against Seraph the Temperate or Seraph the Diligent. Still very good, but it's very clunky and certainly not the S tier status it once was back in the day. Given that, I give it a grade of C because of its inconsistency and difficulty to play. I think the nerf was too heavy. I think it could be 2 cost like Glacial Seal, and then I would give it a B grade. I think it's better than Glacial Seal, except that it costs 3. Let's move on to spells, starting with Stygian Guard. Starting with the common spells, we start with Frozen Lance. Frozen Lance might very well be the worst. It's either the worst or second worst or tied for the worst starter card in the game. It's incredibly weak. 6 damage for 1 cost that is always on the front enemy unit is pretty bad. Even upgraded 16 damage to the front enemy unit is still not that great. There are much better cards. Think about this. This is a Sting has a base damage of 10, it's 0 cost, and it draws a card. And I gave that a C. Certainly Stings are not awful, but they're much better than Frozen Lances. And Frozen Lances, don't have any of that extra benefit. Anytime you have a Frozen Lance doing something valuable, there are you know, 99 other cards that could have done it much better. Given that it's a grade of D, certainly you can make it an average card. With enough buffs, you can get it to be an average, and with insane buffs, you can make it a strong card. But it's so rare that it ever gets that way. It's the priority for me. I even sometimes prioritize getting rid of Frozen Lances over Trained Stewards because it's just such a weak card in general. Doesn't mean it has no value, but it again, there are so many other cards that would do a better job than Frozen Lance at its job. Next, we have Foregone Power. It's apply Frostbite 6 to the front enemy unit and discard a card at random. Foregone Power is significantly better than Frozen Lance. It does the same damage, although it doesn't kill the thing instantly. It does the same amount of damage as Frozen Lance, except that then you have the added effect of it applying for multiple turns. So at you know, if you think about 3 floors, you play it on the bottom floor, it's going to do 6 damage, then 5 damage, then 4 damage, giving you 15 damage. 15 damage is obviously a lot more than 6 damage. And it's a 0 cost. That's really the big value of it, is that it costs 0. And you can stack it, so you could get 2 or 3 of them, and then they add way more damage to a unit. The biggest problem with Foregone Power is the discard. Sometimes the discard can be valuable if you're discarding like Blights or Offering cards, but oftentimes you end up discarding cards that you actually want to keep, and then it's a little bit frustrating. But I would say in general, it's about an average card. Occasionally weak, occasionally strong, but in general, it's quite average. Given that, I give it a grade of C. It's pretty rare that I'm tossing out Foregone Powers. It really depends on the deck. Sometimes I do, but I would say it's not in all cases that I am getting rid of Foregone Powers. Okay, next up is Energy Siphon. So Energy Siphon has text: apply spell weakness 1 to an enemy unit. It's a 0 cost spell. It's and you guys may hate me for this, but I think the biggest problem with spell weakness is, again, similar to what I talked about with the Icy Silliphite, is that it's very inconsistent in how good it is. You have to have spell damage as a base, and you have to have a lot of spell damage to make it really valuable. Like if you're using torches and you're using Frozen Lances, it's just not good enough. And if you think about going like Soul Guard, there's a good chance that you end up not having any spell damage at all in your starting deck, but you start off with Energy Siphon. So given that it can be insanely weak, and Energy Siphon's especially bad because you have to target on a unit. So even if you have an incant deck, you can't put Energy Siphon on your own units. It's only to enemy units. So you might have the card, it might be 0 cost, but if you can't target something, you can't incant off of it. So even there, it's not particularly good. When it's good, it's actually pretty good. I mean, it's the staple card of the spell weakness damage Inferno build. Certainly can be really strong outside of that build as well. Any type of spell damage build, it's going to be pretty good. It's going to be strong. But I can't give it higher than a C just because you can start with it, and you can start with it without having any real spell damage in your deck. And that, to me, it's basically a dead weight. And because of that inconsistency, I can't give it a higher grade than C. Next up is Offering Token. Offering Token, I think, is actually really good. It has the potential to get rid of Blights. It triggers offering spells. It is a fantastic enabler for incants. It works incredibly well with Offering Monument because then you draw 2 and discard 1. It allows you to trade a drawn deadweight for a better card. There's certainly so many good applications for it. At worst, it's average, which is just like it just replaces itself, but you get to pick which card gets discarded, and normally that's just fine. And it has a potential to be very, very, very powerful in specific decks. Given that variance, certainly not a C card. I think it's definitely fits very well as a B card, almost a B+, but there are enough situations where it's just basically replace itself, that it isn't that great. But I would take it in most circumstances with the intention that you later take an offering-based card to use it with. It's great with permafrost. It's not as good with holdover because unless you have an incant-oriented build, it's not that great with holdover, but it is pretty good with permafrost. Then you can save it, wait until you get an offering card you want to get rid of, and then play it with it. So it has some really good potential. Definitely one of the better cards, I think. More consistent cards in more consistent spells than Stygian Guard. Then we have Flash Freeze. Flash Freeze has text, deal 3 damage, apply 8 Frostbite for 1. It's actually really good. I mean, it's to compare this with, it compares very favorably with most other targeted damage spells. At worst, it's deal 11 damage for 1, but it's targeted 11 damage, which makes it significantly better. It can target your own units, so you can use it to kill off your own units, which you sometimes do in certain builds. It's great for bosses, flying bosses, because you're going to get all of those Frostbite stacks as it's flying around. So you can stack Flash Freeze several times, get a lot of Frostbite, and then that Frostbite's going to do a lot of damage to them. So I think it has the potential to be very, very, very strong. It's a pretty good double stack target because 16 Frostbite is, so let's say you do a double or a stack stone and then -1. You would be then doing 16, 19 damage initially, plus 15 damage, plus 14 damage. So that's like 45 damage, 48 damage for 1. 48 damage for 2 is pretty good. And then also it takes more damage during the fights with the Pyre. So I think it's one of the better spells in the deck. It's certainly very consistent because at worst, it's still a really strong card. I'm trying to think what I gave this. I think I gave it a B. This could theoretically be an A card. I think 11 damage for 1 that actually ends up more often than not being 24 damage for 1 puts it at an A grade. But it's right on the edge. I would say it's a solid B+ with really good potential, and at worst it's just an average targeted damage spell. Then moving on into Titan's Gratitude. So Titan's Gratitude used to be significantly worse before it was attuned. The attuned makes a huge difference. That means that you can easily get it to 75 or even more than 100 damage, which makes it much, much better. The biggest problem with a lot of these discarded randoms, similar to Foregone Power, is the randomness of it. Because you can't pick which card gets discarded, it is oftentimes discarding cards you want to keep. It has negative synergy with Permafrost because you might accidentally discard your Permafrost card. But the attuned makes it much better. I still don't think it's that consistent. I think oftentimes damage to front enemy units is not what you want, especially not a single tick of damage with the negative of discarding a card at random. So I think it does have some moments where it is quite weak. On average, I think it's an average card that can be fairly strong when it's upgraded quite a lot. So I think it fits really nicely into kind of like a C+ area. Maybe I should start putting pluses and minuses. I might go back and do that to try to differentiate between certain levels of cards. But this is like a C+. I think it has really good damage potential. It's very easy to get 75 damage to a front enemy unit with Titan's Gratitude. It works really well with any type of additional spell damage or magic power increases with artifacts or units that increase magic power. So it has a lot of good synergies with the magic power, and it works really well also with if you get plus 50 on it, it's doing 75 damage, and then you get spell weakness, it's going to start adding up quite a lot. It's really just the discard card at random that can be very high variance, can really screw you over sometimes, and other times it's very helpful, but it's very inconsistent. So right on the edge between C and B, but in certain decks it can be really good, and especially if you've upgraded it, it can be good. Next up we have Helical Crystallis. Helical Crystallis is deal 25 damage to the front enemy unit twice for 2. I think this is one that when you first see it, it seems amazing. On further use, you realize it's just pretty good. I think at worst, being able to do 25 damage twice, it's certainly better than doing 50 damage once, and it's certainly better than doing 6 damage for 1 Ember. And it takes advantage of the, not as good as attuned, but it still takes quite a good advantage of The fact that it does it twice means that if you add 10 magic damage, it's actually doing 35 damage twice, so it goes to 70. So it's a kind of half attuned type of card. And it works really well with spell weakness because you can put, if you get something like Urchin Spines or Energy Siphon, and you put it on the front unit, you can kill the front unit and then do damage to the second unit. And that second, the 2 ticks ends up being really valuable. And the best part about Helical Crystallis is that it's 2 ticks that are very predictable. A lot of the other tick-based cards or multi-strike, multi-spell cards are random. Helical Crystallis is not, and that I think significantly buffs it. At worst, again, it's average, but it has some really good potential. So with that, I gave it a grade of B. And this is, I would say, a solid middle of the road B. It's not a B plus because it ends up, later the game goes, it adds less and less value, but especially early game, this card is very, very strong. Crypt Builder. Crypt Builder used to be a C-D card because 60 damage to a front enemy unit is actually not amazing for 3. What makes it significantly better is the Attuned. With Attuned, this can actually carry your deck. It's very easy to get this card to 110 damage, and 110 damage for 3 or 110 damage with Offering is amazing. Plus the fact that it pushes enemies back becomes much more relevant. Given those high potentials, I think it's really quite strong. And even 3 damage for 60, especially early game, is not awful. Sometimes that's enough to kill a boss. So given that it has a kind of average effect, at worst, if you don't upgrade it and you don't have any offerings, it's kind of an average, borderline weak card. But it has such good potential. I think it fits really nicely as a B card. Certainly was a C before it became attuned. And I think this is one of the cards that is best improved by attuned. This one and I think it's Impressive are the 2 that I think got the most value. I guess the other one too, the Titan's Gratitude, also improved a lot. So I guess anything that got attuned was significantly improved by attuned. But this one in particular really takes advantage of the attuned, especially with spell weakness. With spell weakness and attuned, this can really get nuts. Ice Tornado. Ice Tornado at worst is an average card, but it often ends up being a lot better. It's 3 times 20 damage. What makes it not as amazing is that it's random enemy units. If this was something like 3 cost deal 20 to all enemy units, it would probably be much better. But even still, it's a pretty good card. 3 cost to deal 20 damage, especially early game. That usually ends up being that it clears almost the entire floor. And late game, it still is quite good. You're still picking off backliners. You sometimes get sad when you play it and it all 3 hit Seraph, but I would say that's more rare than common. Normally, you're really happy with the effect of Ice Tornado. It's good with plus 10 damage because then you're doing 30 damage per random enemy unit, which is good. It's really good when you minus cost it, so getting a 1 cost Ice Tornado is amazing. If you have it with Conduit, you're even happier. So I think it's a really solid, strong card that's average with the potential to be really good, which puts it nicely into a grade of B. Uncommon, starting with Crystalline Seeds. Crystalline Seeds has text Consume, apply 6 Frostbite to enemy units for 0 cost. I think it's pretty good. It's a better foregone power because it doesn't discard anything, and it applies to all units on the floor. Yeah, I mean, you can fit it into almost every deck. That 6 Frostbite can become relevant to just pick off a backline unit. Again, my rule of thumb is you need to be able to do at least 10 damage to a backliner to be able to clear. And this does that. It puts 6 damage, or 6 Frostbite, so you get 6 damage, 5 damage, 4 damage. That's 15 damage to all units that you played on if you played on the bottom floor. And you can use it to stack extra Frostbite onto the flying bosses. So I think it's a good card. It's never going to be your carry card, but I think it's just a solid, fits, run-of-the-mill B card. It's just strong all the time. Certainly it's not particularly great against Seraph the Chaste, but even with Seraph the Chaste, it will kill some of the backliners. Even if he halves it, it'll still do 10 damage. If you play it, unit takes 6 damage, and then it gets halved, it goes down to 3. Unit takes 3 damage, and then it's halved, goes down to 1. Unit takes 1 damage. Still 10 damage on a backline unit, at worst case, with Seraph the Chaste. So, yeah, it's a solid B card. Next up is Preserve. So Preserve has Permafrost by default, and allows you to apply Frozen to a card in your hand. This is a very, very strong card that has very, very high variance. I think Preserve is strong. It's never going to be so powerful that it's going to make your deck nuts. It's certainly, if you combine it with, what is it called? The artifact which makes your frozen cards 0, then it becomes borderline powerful, or you might even say it is powerful. But on the low end, it's just bad. Any type of high discard oriented deck, it can be pretty bad. It's great with incants, but oftentimes you just don't need the frozen. And the one thing that has it redeeming is it's a 0 cost, and it permafrosts itself, so you can hold it for a while and then play it on a card that you want. But I would say there are a lot of situations where it ends up being kind of bad. It's a card you draw and then don't get any effect out of immediately. And unless you're getting incants, or you get 0 costs, or you have cards specifically you want to permafrost, it can be pretty problematic. Given that variance, I think it's a C+. If it was a 1 cost, it would be a low C, maybe even a D. No, it still wouldn't be a D, but it would be like a low C. But given that it's 0 cost, puts it as C+. Borderline B. Definitely worth taking if you have any cards that you particularly want to target and freeze for later, or if you have incant-oriented cards, then it's very good. Urchin Spines. Urchin Spines has text, consume and apply spell weakness 2 to enemy units. So that's all enemy units on the floor. It's significantly better than Energy Siphon. However, it still has the same trap as Energy Siphon, where unless you have damage to take advantage of the Urchin Spines, it ends up being pretty bad. The nice thing about Urchin Spines is that if you get it as a starter card, you only get 1 of it, and then it consumes itself. So it's a dead weight you can get rid of, but it can still end up being a dead weight at the beginning of the game, which is not particularly great. The other nice thing about Urchin Spines is that you can play it on an empty floor to incant. If you have any kind of incant, it's fine. You just play it for 0, get an incant, and it's whatever. One problem with Urchin Spines is that oftentimes you'll have drawn it before the boss appears on the floor, and then you don't play it because it consumes, and you have to hope that it shows up in your hand again later. So it's really good to have Permafrost on, or to remove Consume if you do have spell weakness. It used to be amazing with Stackstone. It's less good with Stackstone now, but it's still okay. So you can get like Remove Consume Stackstone, then it's a 2 cost for everything getting spell weakness 4, which is not bad. But certainly not as good as it used to be when you could do all of that for 1 cost. I think it used to be, before the nerfs to Stackstone, it used to be like a solid B level unit. I think now it's like a B minus C plus. Because spell weakness just ends up being pretty inconsistent. If you don't have the damage spells, it's just not good. If it was a rare card, I would give it a B, because then you're only getting it when you want it. But the fact that it's uncommon and you can start with it and not be able to take advantage of it, I think puts it at a C grade. But it's very close. It's a C plus card, very close to being a B. If it was a rare card, it would be a B, because you're only taking it when you need it. Drain. Drain has text, apply sap 3 and discard a card at random. I think Drain is normally pretty bad, because you're discarding a card in order to make an enemy unit have -6 damage, and then -4 damage, then -2 damage. I just don't feel like Drain ends up doing a lot for me. There are certain builds where it can be really good, especially when you have multiple Drains that are like 0 cost. But the other problem is that they discard each other as well, so it's kind of awkward. Given the clunkiness of the card, the discard at random, I think it can't be higher than a C, and it's actually for me a pretty low C. If it was 0 cost, it would be much better, but the fact that it's 1 cost also makes it more difficult to play around. So given the clunkiness, the discard, and the low amount of sap that it's providing, I give it a grade of C. It's also not good to Stackstone it, because even sap 6 is not really amazing. It's okay on some bosses, but it's not really great for other units. And then you have 2 cost for all of that, and I don't know if that's really valuable enough. But if you Stackstone it and then -1 cost, then it's probably worth it. But as I said, it's a little bit clunky. I think if it was 0 cost, it would be a B. Or if they increase the sap to 5, it would be a B. But given how it is right now, I think I can't justify putting it into every deck to make it a B card. And it's never going to be your carry. I still think you get enough sap out of it. I guess if you Stackstone -1, and then you get you get like duplicated a bunch of times, then it can be really strong. But even then, they're discarding each other, so it kind of gets awkward. So I would say the circumstances when it becomes powerful, like really powerful, is pretty rare. But it can become strong if you stack stone in -1. Then it's, I think, okay. But I think it needs some rework if it wants to be higher than a C. And it's, I would say even right now it's like a C-, almost D. Frenzied Swarm. Frenzied Swarm has text: apply dazed 1 to enemy units and discard your hand. What makes Frenzied Swarm better than a lot of the other discards is that it discards your whole hand, meaning that you know exactly what's being discarded. So all of your offering cards you have in your hand will automatically get discarded with Frenzied Swarm, and they'll all get played. The order gets a little bit weird. I'm not 100% certain on how the order of multiple offering discards works. I think it might be where they are from right to left. I think it goes from right to left is the effects, but I need to test it to find out for sure. But Frenzied Swarm, I think, is a good card. It's very easy to make extremely powerful. With 0 cost and holdover, it's amazing because you can play out your whole hand and then just use Frenzied Swarm at the end to make everything dazed. Where it becomes less good is if you have revenge-oriented decks. It's really bad because you want them to strike your enemies. But then you can always play it on a different floor. You don't have to play it on the floor where you have your revenge unit. As well, it's can be bad in that it discards any of your permafrosted cards. So if you have like Frozen and Frenzied Swarm, becomes really awkward unless you have specifically an incant build, then it's okay. But having any permafrosted cards kind of lowers the value of Frenzied Swarm a little bit. But I would say at worst it's an average, and it has the potential to become really strong. You can also stack stone it and get 2 days on enemies, and that is actually really powerful because then you get 2 days. They go to the pyre and take a damage. You can make it -1 as well, so then it's 2 days for 1, which is really, really strong. It's discarding your whole hand. But I really think the preferred method is -1 holdover. Then you're discarding your whole hand every turn, and you can -1, or you can add days to every unit. And you even can play it when you have like Ember Drain or low Ember costs. So I think given how easy it is to make it good, I give it a solid B. At worst, it's average, but it can become very strong, very powerful. But it's not an A card because there are so many situations where it ends up being very average that I can't justify also putting it as an A. Ice Storm. Ice Storm is really good once it's upgraded, and until then it's just really bad. I think the best is just get 2 +10 damages on it, then it's 21 damage 5 times for 1 cost, which is really, really good. But base value wise, it's kind of weak. It's a better Plink. I mean, it's better than Plink. It's worse than Torch because you can't target, and if you end up hitting 5 onto Seraph or 5 onto the front enemy unit, it's really bad. This is one of those that I think is very borderline. The fact that it's so easy to make it okay definitely makes it better. So you can get it to deal 11 5 times, which is pretty good for 1. But if you don't get it upgraded, it's really bad. Like a D tier card almost, or like a low C. I think given how it is right now, I think it fits really nicely as like a very strong C+ card, where it's very easy to make it a B card. You just add a magic power stone, and suddenly it's a B, almost an A card. I think the best situation for it is if you can do that combination where you add consume and then remove consume, and then you get what is it called? We'll come up with it later, but it's where you draw 3 cards, make them 0 cost, make them consume, and then add 20 magic power. Then this becomes insane. What's nice about Ice Storm is it's kind of like it has attuned, but it doesn't have attuned, right? It's ×5 magic power, but it's not in 1 hit, it's in across 5 hits, which I think is actually better. The fact that it's random also is a little bit of a negative for the card because you can't have those times, even when it's super powerful. Let's say you have it at 11 damage or 21 damage, and then you hit Seraph for 100 damage, and you're like, okay, that's not really what I wanted. I wanted to take off all these multi-striking backline units. So it's not perfect. I think it can become very good very easily, but it does have some moments where it really sucks. And given that it has those moments, I think I can't justify putting it above a C+. But it's very, very easy to get it to be much more powerful. Guardian's Amulet has text offering apply sap 2 to enemy units. Guardian's Amulet I think is a little bit too weak. I think it really just needs one more sap, and I would put it as like a worst case average, potentially strong card. But sap 2 is just so bad. It goes away in 2 turns, and it's not even that much damage reduction to all the enemy units. I find it very difficult to play. There is one situation, getting Heaven's Aid on this can become insane. If you double stack it and then get Heaven's Aid, it's nuts. But that's like such a weird fluke type of build. It's not really worth discussing as a main one. And it's even not the best offering card. I think it just needs, I really just think it needs one more sap. And then it's pretty strong. I would put it as a B. But given that it has only 2 sap, and it's so expensive if you don't have offering, that it's very, very weak to get. Playing it outright for 2 sap is just a really sad turn. It's really not very good. So I think given that variance, it's a grade level C, maybe even it's probably an average C, because you can do some upgrades to it to make it more consistent. If, for example, you double stack it, you don't really care about the Ember cost. Then, if you have double stack and you have a way to discard it, then it's much better. Because Sap 4 is really good, Sap 2 is kind of bad. So I really think it just needs Sap 3, and then it would be a B. Because that would be worth it. 3 sap is much better. It's much better than 2 sap. Because a lot of units have like 5-6 damage that they're doing. And if you can remove that 5-6 damage, or even units that do 2 damage or 4 damage, and then being able to have them do no damage to your pyre can be really valuable. And it's certainly much better on Seraph if it has extra sap, because then the sap lasts longer and it ends up adding across several turns. So I think that's all it needs. I think it just needs to be sap 3, and then it's so much better. That would be my recommendation to the devs. Add 1 sap to this, and then I think it's a significantly better card. Titan's Tooth has text offering, deal 5 damage to enemy units and apply Frostbite 10. At worst, it's a 15 AoE that has the potential to be more than 15, but actually like, what, 27? 27 plus 5. 32 damage AoE if you play it on the bottom floor. And for 3, that's good. I mean, that's more damage than an Ice Tornado does, and you know exactly who it's hitting. It's hitting everything on the floor. Given that how easy it is to just take out backliners with this spell, I think it's a guaranteed B at minimum, because even just playing outright is actually good. But it has potential to be really, really strong, because you can double stack it, you can offering it out, so if you discard it, it's really, really strong. And you can even just add damage to it. You can add plus 10 damage to it, and it makes it a lot better. So given all those situations to make it really powerful, I think it fits really nicely as a B card. It's at worst an average card. You play 3 for 3 Ember, you get an AoE that clears out most floors and does significant damage to bosses as well. And it has a really high ceiling where it can do a lot of damage. So I think it's a really solid B card. Certainly once you double stack it, and if you have offering discard opportunities, then I would put it as an A card. Now we're into the rares. First rare card is Spike of the Stygian, has text, consume, apply 1x sap and 5x frostbite. This used to be really bad. The 5x frostbite actually makes a big difference. If you play this outright, just 3 Ember, play Spike of the Stygian, it's pretty good. 3 sap, as I said, 3 sap is actually pretty good. Certainly it would be better if it was an AoE, but still 3 sap is pretty good. And 15 frostbite is pretty good. 15 frostbite ends up being 15, 29, 33, 15, 29, 30, 42 damage onto a unit if you play it on the bottom floor. So you put that on a boss, that's 42 damage as long as if you don't have any other frostbite, but probably you have a little bit other frostbite, and then it's just adding a frostbite on top. If you get the first Hell Pact, it's really strong. If you get double stack on it, it's really strong. Double stack means you get 4 sap and 20 frostbite for 3, which is amazing. So I think it's a good card. I think it's probably If you play it for less than 3 Ember, it's significantly worse. But even you playing it for 1 to pick off a backliner is fine. It has that flexibility where you just play it, pick it off a backliner, and then it's gone. I don't typically like to consume remove because I don't think it's good enough to keep for 2 Frostbite or 2 Step and 10 Frostbite for 3 is kind of bad. But as a consume card, I think it's really good. And if you get the first Hell Pack, then removing consume is really, really good. But I think typically I double stack it. And that's it. Just double stack it. And then maybe put Permafrost on it so you can play it when you want. And that's a really strong card. So I think it fits really well as a B. It can be weak, but I think those moments are more rare. I think it's one of the better spikes in the game. And yeah, I like it. I think it's a good one. Harness the Titan has text: apply +5 magic power to spells in hand. This is one of those that is complete feast or famine. If you have a lot of spell damage spells and you're getting Harness the Titan at the same time, it's really, really good. If you don't have damage spells or you have only a handful of them and you're not drawing them together, it's really bad. It's a dead weight. Given that feast or famine variance, I can't put it higher than a C. The one thing I would say is if it wasn't spells in hand and if it instead was spells in your deck, I would definitely put it as a B. Borderline A. But given that it only applies to things in your hand, I think it makes it significantly worse. At least significantly less consistent. Although it has a really high top end. If you can consistently play this, like you get holdover and 0 cost and you're just playing it over and over again, it's really, really powerful and will scale up, especially your attuned cards, a lot. That's 25 damage every time you play it on an attuned card. Or multiplicative if it's a hit several times card. So given that, I think it fits as a C, probably a C+, because it's I think it's a pretty good one to take. But you just have to consider what is the likelihood that you're going to draw Harness the Titan and take advantage of it. What also makes it better is that it's rare, so you're very likely to take it with cards that already have spell damage. But I would still say the fact that you can't guarantee you're going to draw it every time makes it a little bit less consistent. But this is arguably a B-, but I think it fits nicely as a C+ right now. Ice and Pyre. Ice and Pyre I also had a really difficult time with because I really like Ice and Pyre. It can do so much damage. It is so good if you can get Permafrost and +10 damage and spell damage. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Or if you get holdover on it, -1, it's also fantastic. But it requires exactly those kinds of upgrades to be excellent. Otherwise, it's super inconsistent because you can't guarantee it shows up when you need it. But this is one of those that, again, is very borderline. And Stygian is hard because so much of their cards are situational, but the situations are so good when they work. Ice and Pyre is exactly that. I think it fits very nicely as a C card just because, and I should say, so the text is Pyre bound, right? So you can only play it on the Pyre floor or the top floor. And given that variance, I can't put it higher than a C+, but it's like right there. It just has those, unfortunately has those weak moments where you just can't take advantage of it. And because those come up and they come up often enough, it still puts it from being a B, but it's so close because it's such a powerful effect. 90 damage, and it's attuned, and it's only 1 cost, is really, really strong. But you just have to, it's mandatory to get some of those upgrades, either damage, to get the potential out of it, or consistency with holdover and Pyre and Permafrost. Siren Song. Siren Song fits in the same kind of space. It's fantastic with holdover because you can guarantee the top units are never hitting your units. They're always going to the Pyre. It's also a way you can kind of stack days onto Seraph every time Seraph gets onto the top floor. However, similar to Ice and Pyre, it has a variance where if you have nothing on the top floor, it's a dead weight. And given that it has those, I can't get it higher than a C+, but it's definitely a C+. These Pyre-bound cards are really good. They just have to be played in the right decks, and you have to get the right upgrades for them. You need holdover, you need Permafrost. This one is also pretty good with Stackstone because then you're getting days 6, which is enough to kill almost every single unit in the game with your Pyre. The other thing that also sets Siren Song back is that if you can't play it on Seraph when Seraph is, or not just Seraph, but any flying bosses, you can't play it on flying bosses except during their flying stages, because if you ascend them to the pyre, they just kill your pyre. So that specific instance is also pretty weak, but I think in general it's pretty good. That's not even just true for flying bosses, that's all bosses. I think that's worth considering too. The fact that you can't play it against bosses or else they just go to your pyre is also a negative about the card. Yeah, so given that, I think C fits really well. Deep Offering. So Deep Offering has text. Consume, draw your hand, discard your hand, and draw 5. I think Deep Offering is really good. It's bad when you don't have a lot of Ember and you haven't upgraded it, but outside of that circumstance, it's really good. I mean, it auto triggers any offerings you have in your hand. You can play it as the last card in your hand and then immediately draw 5 cards without discarding anything, which is also really good. But as a base, it's not particularly great until you get either more Ember, you've reduced the cost of it, or you have offerings or incants to make up for the fact that you are discarding your hand. Given that variance, I think it's also one that sits very right in that C plus B minus spot, where it's really inconsistent when it doesn't work, but it's very, very good when it does work. I would definitely take it if you have a lot of Ember, or you're going to immediately reduce the cost of it, or you have incants. Then Deep Offering is amazing. Outside of that, it's questionable. It really depends on whether you think you can get value out of the 5 cards you're drawing after you discard your hand. So given that, it's a C, C+, very good card that is somewhat inconsistent depending on your build setup, and requires typically minus cost or a way to generate Ember to take advantage of it. Ancient Synergy. Ancient Synergy's text is deal damage to the front enemy unit equal to 2 times the number of spells in your deck, 3 times. Very complicated, longest text card I think in the game. But it's a very, very, very powerful card. This one I tossed around a lot. I think I also may change the rating here. I'm pretty sure I gave it a C. And the reason I gave it a C is it requires, I think, at minimum 7 or 8 spells in your deck. If you don't have 7 or 8 spells, it's doing like 12 damage 3 times for 3, which is worse than Ice Tornado. So at 10 spells in your deck, it's equal to Ice Tornado, except that it's to the front enemy unit, which is better. But at like 5, 6, 7, 8 spells, it's pretty bad. And less than that, it's like god-awful. The other thing about it that's nice is that it counts itself. But when you have spell weakness and you have a lot of spells in your deck, Ancient Synergy becomes the nuts. But I'll keep it. I think I can't justify putting it as a B, only because if you don't have enough spells, it's just really bad. It's really expensive for a very low damage effect. But as long as you have a lot of spells, it's much better. What does make it a lot better is that it's a rare card, which means that you're only going to draft it. You're never going to get it as a starter card. So this is probably similar to the last few ones, where it's a C, but it's a C+. Where it's quite easy to take advantage of the card, but it has some really low lows if you don't have the proper setup. And it is very expensive. It's a 3-cost card for an effect that has a wide variance. So I think it fits actually. I might even change what I said. I think it actually fits nicely as a solid C, not even a C+, because that variance in the damage is really, really high. Yeah. I think that's where it fits. Solid C. But it can very easily become a nuts card if you get the right upgrades for it. And it takes advantage of any magic power you get as well. So magic power is also really good because it's similar to Attuned. It's 3 times the damage. Okay. Finally, last card in the set, Hoarfrost Effigy. Hoarfrost Effigy reads, transfer all Frostbite on this floor to a unit, then double the amount of Frostbite. This is the Flying Boss Killer. And that's basically it. It's not great on non-flying bosses because they only show up at the end, so you can't double very easily on them. The nice thing is that it's rare, so you should only take it if you need it, but oftentimes it ends up being a win more card. You would have one, and Hoarfrost Effigy just wins faster. The exception is you use it to kill off, and I mentioned this at the beginning, you use this to kill off Seraph before the units kill your Pyre. Not Seraph, but the units kill your Pyre. That's when it becomes very, very useful. But apart from that, it's mostly used as a win faster, win more card. And if you don't have any Frostbite, obviously it's awful. But you wouldn't take it if you didn't have any Frostbite. It's a rare card. But I think it's slightly overrated, and I think it's more inconsistent than it seems to be at first glance. It's very expensive. It's very hard to get that base Frostbite oftentimes onto Seraph. And if you don't get that base Frostbite, you're doubling like low Frostbite amounts. So given that level of variance, I still think it can't be a B or an A, but I think it's a good solid C card. It's incredibly powerful in the right deck. It's god-awful in others. So that variance puts it as a solid C card. And that's it. So let's take a look at the overall summary. So for S cards, there are no cards that I would say are auto picks that are going to carry your deck. In A, we have Siren of the Sea and Titan Sentry, two of the best units in the game. Under the B, we also have some of the best units in the game. We have Cold Celia, Guard of the Unnamed. I put Cold Celia twice because I guess I really like her. Guardian Stone, Nameless Siren, Offering Monument, Offering Token, Flash Freeze, Helicocrystallis, Crypt Builder, Ice Tornado, Crystalline Seeds, and Frenzied Swarm, Titan's Tooth, and Spike of the Stygian. Then under C's, we have Mollusk Mage, Cuddle Hex, Icy Silophyte, Glacial Seal, Lodestone Totem, Foregone Power, Energy Siphon, Titan's Gratitude, Preserve, Urchin Spines, Drain, Ice Storm, Guardian's Amulet, Harness the Titan, Ice Empire, Siren's Song, Deep Offering, Ancient Synergy, and Hoarfrost Effigy. And then under D, we have Frozen Lance. So what's the summary? The summary is Stygian Guard is, and I should say this to kind of set it up, Stygian Guard is probably the most powerful clan in the game. It has the most powerful spells in the game by far, except for the couple of S cards in other decks. The champions are really good. We'll talk about champions in a later video, but both champions are pretty good. And they have some of the most consistent units in the game. And the incant style deck is so consistent. It's such a consistent deck. All you need is a good tank and either one of the Sirens, and you're going to be fine, because you tend to incant like crazy with a deck like this. The problem is that a lot of their cards are very situational, and that puts a lot of them in that C range. Maybe C+, but still in that C range. So it's a very inconsistent, apart from specifically the incant build, which is why most of the incant units rank quite a bit higher, and the damage Frostbite units tend to rank quite a bit lower. But let me know your thoughts. Go into the comments. Tell me how I'm wrong. Tell me what you would change in your rankings. And I'm happy to jump into the discussion as I have with the last two. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. If you did, give it a like. Subscribe and check out my other videos. If you didn't like it, give it a dislike. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.